Welcome to Reform Thinking. Usually when we evaluate whether someone is a good person, we rely on a fairly straightforward set of criteria.
Yeah,
It's kind of like looking at a ledger. We see someone returning a lost wallet with all the cash still inside, or we see them volunteering at a local animal shelter on the weekends.
oh, sure.
Or maybe we just notice how fiercely they protect their own children, and we mentally check a box. We say, yes, that is a decent human being. We see the action, we categorize it, and we feel a sense of resolution.
Yeah, we like things to be observable and easy to categorize. I mean, it brings a sense of predictable order to our social world.
It really does.
We build entire communities on the assumption that these observable actions are the absolute bedrock of human goodness.
But then, you step into the philosophical and theological framework of Jonathan Edwards, and suddenly that neat little ledger is thrown completely out the window.
Oh, completely.
We are looking at a moral landscape today that is surprisingly uncomfortable. Our mission for this deep dive is to break down a rather startling piece of writing by Edwards.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
He wrote an essay investigating why the everyday traits you and I consider entirely good, things like pity, gratitude, and patriotism, are so often mistaken for true virtue.
It is a striking premise when you really think about it. I mean, we build our entire societal structures on these traits.
We write songs about them.
Right. We hand out civilian awards for them. And here we have a text arguing that we might be completely misinterpreting what they actually are at their core.
Okay, let's unpack this for you. What if the things you think make you a good person are actually just an extended, narrow form of self-love?
That is the big question.
Edwards makes a massive claim here. He draws a thick, permanent line separating our natural affections from true, universal virtue. And I'll be honest, reading this the first time, I felt my own defenses going up.
Oh, I think everyone does.
I thought about my love for my family and my friends, and it felt like, he was attacking the best parts of human nature.
That is a very natural reaction to this text. To really grasp what is happening here, we need a clear structural overview of his argument.
Please, because it's heavy.
Yeah. So the text is not saying that pity or gratitude are bad things. Edwards isn't suggesting we should abandon our families or, become emotionless stoics.
Right.
Or stop being thankful when someone helps us out. Rather, he's arguing that these traits lack the essential nature of true virtue.
Which he defines very specifically.
Yes. According to his framework, true virtue is defined as benevolence to being in general.
Benevolence to being in general. That is a phrase we really need to hold on to today. But let's put this on the ground. What does that actually mean for someone just driving to the grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon?
Well, he means a comprehensive, all-encompassing love for the entire universe of existence, with God positioned at the very head of it.
Wow. Oh,
If an action or a feeling does not spring from that universal benevolence, it might be useful, it might be socially beneficial, but it falls short of being true virtue.
so it means that true goodness isn't just about how you treat the cashier at the grocery store.
Right.
It's about whether your kindness to that cashier is an outflow of a much larger love for the Creator and all of his creation.
Spot on. So we are talking about a completely different standard of measurement. He's looking at the engine, not just the speed of the car.
I like that.
And he gives us a roadmap for our own self-deception, explaining why we get this so mixed up. The first major reason he points out is what we might call the illusion of partial resemblance.
The illusion of partial resemblance.
Our natural affections look an awful lot like virtue.
Let's dig into that illusion, because they share the general nature of virtue, which is love, right?
Oh, right.
When we look at natural affections, we see things that look incredibly similar to love. They just operate within a restricted private sphere.
And let's look at how this resemblance plays out in our daily lives. Pity is a really great place to start.
Yeah, think about what pity actually does.
Well, pity resembles universal benevolence because it makes a person uneasy when others are in distress.
Yes, absolutely.
If you see someone hurting, maybe a friend who just lost their job, or even a stranger crying on a park bench, natural pity creates an internal discomfort.
You feel a literal pang in your chest.
Exactly, and you want to relieve their pain. That is partially the same effect that true benevolence would have. True benevolence also desires the relief of suffering.
But the difference is the scope and the origin, isn't it?
It is.
Pity is often reactionary and localized. It's triggered by the immediate sight of suffering right in front of you.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily arise from a sweeping love for all existence. And the text also brings up natural gratitude, which is even more interesting to me.
Oh, gratitude's a big one.
Because we are taught from childhood that saying thank you is the absolute mark of a good person.
Gratitude resembles love, but it's often just a requital of kindness.
Yeah.
You're basically returning a transaction.
A transaction.
Yeah, someone did something beneficial for your private system, and you are balancing the scales with affection.
I was thinking about the specific biblical example Edwards uses here because it perfectly illustrates this transactional nature of gratitude. He talks about Saul and David from the Old Testament.
Oh, that's a brilliant illustration.
Just for context for you listening, King Saul is actively hunting David with an army, trying to kill him out of pure jealousy.
Boy,
And David gets a chance to assassinate Saul in a cave. Saul is completely vulnerable, but David cuts off a corner of Saul's robe and spares his life instead.
and when Saul realizes this later, the emotional reaction is intense.
Oh. He weeps loudly.
He does. He calls David his son, he acknowledges David's righteousness, and he feels this immense surge of gratitude.
Because if you just took a snapshot of that single moment outside the cave, Saul looks incredibly virtuous.
He really does. He looks humble, loving, and deeply grateful.
But Saul had no real friendship for David. He was just moved by the immediate occasion. Saul's gratitude was entirely dictated by the fact that his own life was spared.
Yeah,
It was self-preservation echoing back as temporary affection.
and we know how it ends.
Right. A few chapters later, the emotional high wears off, and Saul is right back out in the wilderness hunting David again.
Yep.
The gratitude had the appearance of virtuous love for a brief season, but because it lacked that benevolence to being in general, it evaporated the moment the private benefit was no longer the focal point.
Saul's affection was restricted entirely to his own survival. And that captures the psychological blindness Edwards identifies so well.
The blindness.
Yeah, people confine their views to their private system.
I was trying to come up with an analogy for this. Think about it like having a perfectly manicured, beautiful garden in your own backyard.
Okay, I'm with you.
You have blooming roses, a tranquil water feature, perfect green grass. It's undeniably beautiful, and you spend hours tending to it.
Sounds nice.
But you are completely ignoring the fact that the rest of the city around you is on fire.
Oh, wow.
Inside the fence of your private sphere, the affection looks gorgeous. You are a great gardener. But outside that fence, it completely fails to account for the whole.
That analogy really hits the mark. People focus entirely on their backyard garden, and they shut out everything else to which they stand related.
Everything else.
The argument here is that if your private system contained the sum total of universal existence, then your benevolence to it would have true beauty.
Right. If your backyard was the entire universe.
Yeah, then tending to it would be the ultimate virtue.
The
Things considered, it would be virtuous. But your private system is just an infinitely small fraction of reality.
And most notably, people leave the divine being entirely out of their view.
This is a huge point.
This part really caught my attention because it diagnoses a very modern condition. Edwards writes that people treat God as a shadowy, imaginary being.
Like shadowy bee.
Because he isn't perceived by our external senses, we just leave him out of our calculations entirely.
We calculate right and wrong solely based on the physical people right in front of us.
Right.
We are conversant with our friends, our coworkers, our family members through our external senses. We see them, hear them, interact with them.
So they feel intensely real.
Exactly. Their approval or disapproval feels immediate and heavy.
While the creator, who is the actual head of the system, gets sidelined, it's so easy for human beings to do this.
It's almost our default state.
You can be a wonderful, loyal friend, a loving parent, and a reliable neighbor, all while completely ignoring the architect of the universe.
Yeah.
In your private system, you look like a saint. In the universal system, you are essentially ignoring the most significant being in existence.
What is a fatal flaw in the architecture of your morality, according to this framework?
The fatal flaw.
If God is the fountain and head of universal existence, any moral system that leaves him out as a shadowy afterthought cannot possibly be considered true virtue.
It just doesn't work.
It is mathematically and philosophically incomplete. You are calculating the orbit of the planets while completely ignoring the gravitational pull of the sun.
That's a great way to put it. But wait, if this private system is just about me in my backyard, how do you explain something like patriotism?
Oh, patriotism.
Yeah. Entire generations of people have sacrificed their lives for their country. That doesn't look like a narrow private garden. It looks massive. It looks like the very definition of a broad, universal love.
And that brings us to the mechanics of scale. We are highly susceptible to being deceived by large numbers.
Deceived by scale.
Edwards uses a striking historical example to make this point. The Romans.
The Roman era.
Yeah.
For the Romans, love of their country was considered the absolute pinnacle of virtue. Patriotism was their civic religion.
It was extolled by their philosophers, celebrated in their literature, and rewarded by their political system. To sacrifice yourself for the glory of Rome was the ultimate good.
But look at the dark underbelly of this Roman virtue.
It's dark.
This exact affection, this highly praised love of country, was employed to destroy the rest of mankind.
Yes.
Their patriotism fueled the Punic Wars, the complete leveling of Carthage. It fueled the conquest of Gaul, the subjugation of entire civilizations across Europe and North Africa.
It was relentless.
Their private affection for Rome was an absolute nightmare for everyone who was not Roman.
And this happens because of the contracted limits of the human mind. When a private affection extends to a large number of people, like an entire political party or an expansive nation, it fills up our mental capacity.
It's just too big for us to process.
Right. It looks so massive to us that it engrosses our sight. We look at an empire and we mistake it for the universal system.
We can't see past the borders.
Exactly. The larger the number, the more it bears the image of the universal, and the easier it is to be deceived by it.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Go ahead.
If we get tricked by scale, if we mistake large groups for true virtue because they fill up our vision, why don't we applaud raw self-interest? Self-love is the most common natural affection of all. Why doesn't that fool us?
Because self-love is simply too obviously narrow.
Obviously narrow.
Yeah, the object of self-love is just one single person.
Right.
No matter how much you love yourself, your singular physical presence cannot engross the view of society.
Right.
Everyone around you can clearly see that you are just one individual. The human mind is large enough to recognize that one person is not the universe.
Unless a person is so consumed by pride that they imagine themselves to be the entire world, which is a pathology all its own.
Well, yeah, barring that level of extreme delusion, yes. Therefore, we do not applaud raw self-interest as a high moral good.
Makes sense.
But when that self-interest is expanded to include millions of people in a nation, the boundaries are far enough away that we can no longer see them clearly.
We lose sight of the fence.
We lose sight of the fence around the garden because the garden is the size of a continent.
Think about your own life, because most of us are not Roman emperors conquering Gaul, but we deal with this exact deception of scale in our modern lives.
We do, every day.
Think about how extreme loyalty to a specific group, maybe a political affiliation, a social movement, or even a corporation, can shape your behavior.
It's a very practical application. Self-love and these private affections are necessary for society. But if they are not subordinated to a more extensive principle, a person becomes a common enemy to the general system.
Right. If your entire moral universe is defined by the success of your company, you might engage in ruthless business practices that harm vulnerable communities.
Absolutely.
Inside the walls of your company, you are a hero. You are winning market share. You are protecting your employees. You are paying out great dividends.
You get a bonus.
You get a massive bonus. But to the general system, to the wider community, you are a hostile force. You have taken a private affection, scaled it up, and weaponized it against the rest of existence.
Which highlights the absolute danger of unchecked natural affections. They are capable of immense destruction precisely because they feel so morally justified from the inside.
That's the terrifying part.
The Romans felt incredibly righteous while they were dismantling other nations.
So if these private affections are not true virtue, and if they can actually make us enemies to the general system, why does our own internal moral compass approve of them so strongly?
That is the crucial question.
If tribalism is actually destructive, why does my conscience feel so clear when I support my tribe? This moves our discussion to a really fascinating part of Edwards' argument, the role of the conscience.
The operation of the natural conscience requires us to differentiate between two types of moral approval.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Natural conscience does indeed approve of virtue and condemn vice. But it does so from a secondary, inferior sense of beauty.
Inferior sense of beauty.
Yes. It does not operate from a true relish of essential virtue.
An inferior sense of beauty, what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, conscience operates heavily on the concept of uniformity and natural agreement.
Uniform.
Yeah, it recognizes the symmetry in loving those who love you and showing kindness to those who show kindness to you. It also operates on the association of ideas.
Let's slow down and unpack that association of ideas, because this is where Edwards makes a staggering psychological observation.
He argues that people connect certain behaviors with profit and pleasantness, and they connect other behaviors with hurtfulness and malignancy.
Okay.
We approve of justice and fairness, not necessarily because we have a pure, universal love for all beings, but because we associate a just society with our own safety and profit.
We like being safe.
Right. We dislike theft because we associate it with the pain of losing our own property.
So our internal judge is highly pragmatic.
Very pragmatic. The great governor of the world implanted natural conscience to act in his stead as an internal judge.
An internal judge.
It is designed to maintain order. When it is thoroughly awakened and well-informed, it actually agrees with God on what to approve.
But, and I think here's the crucial distinction, it does not approve it for the same reasons.
Precisely. It identifies the correct behaviors, but the underlying motivation is driven by self-love or an appreciation for symmetrical order, rather than a genuine benevolence to being in general.
I was trying to think of a good comparison to visualize how this works. Think about how a smoke detector operates in your house.
Oh, like this.
A modern smoke detector is a highly sensitive, valuable piece of equipment. Most of them use a tiny amount of a radioactive isotope, like americium-241, to ionize the air inside a chamber.
Science class.
Right. It measures the electrical current. When smoke particles enter that chamber, they disrupt the current and the alarm goes off. It senses the smoke of hurtfulness or the rapid heat of danger. It alerts you that something is wrong.
A very fitting analogy.
But the smoke detector has absolutely no concept of the actual nature of the fire.
Right.
It does not understand the chemistry of combustion. It does not appreciate the warmth of a contained hearth versus the destruction of wild inferno.
It just beeps.
It is merely a reactive mechanism based on physical disruption. It senses particles in the air, and it triggers a buzzer. Natural conscience, in this framework, is the smoke detector.
That works so well.
It senses the associative markers of right and wrong, the disruption of social order, the threat to personal safety, but it lacks a true, essential appreciation of the flame of universal love itself.
And just like a smoke detector, the alarm can be muted, ignored, or broken over time.
That's a scary thought.
Which is a terrifying prospect when you realize it is your primary internal warning system.
But I would still rather have a smoke detector than sleep in a house without one, right?
Oh, of course.
Even if conscience is just a secondary alarm system driven by association, having it must be better than not having it.
Yes, and that leads directly into the concept of negative moral goodness.
Hmm.
Negative moral goodness is defined as the negation or absence of true moral evil.
It is a goodness defined by a lack of something worse.
Correct. Having a sensitive natural conscience or possessing natural pity and gratitude is not a positive true virtue. But lacking them is evidence of a much greater, much more destructive wickedness.
But these alarms can get disconnected. The essay gets quite stark here about how we lose these natural safety nets. It outlines a process of deterioration.
It details how sin causes stupidity and insensibility of conscience over time.
Stupidity of conscience.
Yeah. For example, losing gratitude is a direct sign of increasing pride.
Let's expand on that connection between gratitude and pride. How does one destroy the other?
If gratitude is the natural requital of kindness, acknowledging that someone else has provided you with a benefit, then pride is the systematic dismantling of that acknowledgement.
Okay, how so?
Pride involves habituating yourself to treat yourself as if you are everything. If you are everything and your needs are paramount, then the kindness of others is viewed as nothing more than your due.
You just expect it.
You begin to look upon their sacrifices as insignificant. When you elevate yourself to the center of the universe, gratitude starves to death.
And Edwards doesn't stop with pride. He moves on to sensuality. This is where I want to zero in on a very vivid metaphor. He describes sensual appetites acting like a trench.
The psychology of this deterioration is incredibly sharp.
Imagine a landscape where water naturally flows through various streams and channels. These channels represent your natural pity, your family affection, your basic human empathy.
It irrigates your life.
Yes, it waters everything. But then, a deep trench of sensual appetite is dug through the middle of the land.
A trench.
Through habit and custom, a lifestyle of constantly seeking physical comfort and pleasure, all the water is drawn out of its natural channels, the empathy dries up, the familial love evaporates, and all the emotional energy is carried into one single massive channel of self-indulgence.
A worldly sensual life involves the mind entirely in physical, sensitive objects. This makes the mind completely unfit for spiritual contemplation.
It's too muddy.
Exactly. It becomes incapable of recognizing the invisible deity.
Because the mind is entirely preoccupied with feeding the trench.
Yes. Furthermore, repeatedly acting on selfish principles without visible punishment severs the mind's understanding of the connection between sin and misery.
The smoke detector gets muffled.
If you act selfishly and get away with it, the smoke detector we talked about earlier gets a little quieter each time.
Think about your own habits in light of this metaphor.
Yeah.
Have you ever noticed periods in your life where your basic empathy seems to slip away?
We all go through it.
Where you find it harder to summon gratitude for the people who support you? Or where you just feel numb to the suffering of others?
Yeah.
According to this framework, that emotional numbness is a massive warning sign. It means the water of your natural affections is being actively drained into a selfish channel.
It's not just a phase.
No, it's not just that you are tired, it's that your internal landscape is being re-engineered towards self-indulgence.
And when these natural principles of pity and affection are diminished by pride and sensuality, the habitual disposition turns toward envy and malice.
The water goes stagnant.
The removal of the negative moral goodness creates a vacuum that is inevitably filled with active hostility.
Okay, looking at all of this, a very pragmatic question arises. If the water is constantly threatening to drain into this selfish trench, and our virtues are just natural affections prone to drying up, why hasn't society burned to the ground?
That is a fair question.
How do these flawed secondary principles manage to keep human society running as well as it does?
Well, people look at natural affections and see that they produce the exact same practical effects that true virtue would produce.
The results look identical on paper.
Often, yes. The supreme ruler constituted the world in such a way that these natural principles tend toward the good of mankind.
They hold things together.
They act as a massive restraint system against vice. Natural pity preserves human beings from cruelty. If you feel uneasy seeing someone in pain, you are far less likely to torture them. Natural affection prevents injustice toward friends and family. And self-love, interestingly enough, restrains acts of real wickedness because we fear the social and legal consequences of bad behavior.
We don't want to go to prison.
We do not want to go to prison, so we do not steal.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
If natural pity stops me from being cruel to my neighbor and self-love stops me from embezzling money from my employer, why does the motive matter?
The classic utilitarian argument.
If the result is peace, if society is functioning, people are safe, and the trains are running on time, why should we care if it is driven by universal benevolence or just a highly evolved system of self-preservation?
It is the ultimate utilitarian objection. But Edwards points out the flaw in judging something purely by its pragmatic effect. He uses a very grounding comparison. Hunger and thirst.
Hunger and thirst. Okay, walk me through that.
Hunger and thirst also tend toward the general good of mankind. They motivate us to eat, to farm, to build supply chains, to survive. They are absolutely necessary for the continuation of the human race. Yet nobody in their right mind calls the physical sensation of hunger a moral virtue.
Wow. I honestly hadn't thought about it that way.
It's quite the paradigm shift.
Just because a mechanism produces a necessary survival outcome does not elevate it to the status of moral goodness. Breathing keeps me alive, but breathing isn't a virtue.
Precisely. And there's a very pointed observation about self-love. While self-love puts men upon seeking what looks like true virtue and restrains massive wickedness, it is also the literal source of all the wickedness in the world.
It is the disease and the temporary bandage all rolled into one.
A mechanism that merely prevents its own worst symptoms is not the same as a cure.
Man, that's heavy.
Self-love might stop you from robbing a bank because you fear jail, but self-love is also the exact reason another person decides to rob the bank in the first place, believing they can get away with it and benefit themselves.
Totally unstable.
It is a wildly unstable foundation for morality.
We are relying on the very engine of our selfishness to occasionally hit the brakes on our worst impulses. And we call those brake lights virtue.
Which is why the distinction is so vital. If we mistake the brakes For the engine of universal love, we will never pursue the actual cure.
We just settle.
We will settle for a society that is merely restrained from destroying itself, rather than a society that is genuinely good.
This raises the final and perhaps most urgent question of this discussion. We've spent all this time tearing down the natural affections, exposing their narrowness, their transactional nature, their vulnerability to pride.
We have.
Are we doomed then? Is it possible for these natural earthly affections to ever actually become truly virtuous? Were we just stuck with a broken system?
We finally arrive at the concluding redemptive concept in the text, and the answer is yes.
Oh, good.
Natural affections and true virtue share the same names in our language: love, pity, gratitude. Because true virtue can actually inhabit these natural instincts.
They can become a vessel for something greater.
Yes, there is such a thing as a truly virtuous pity, a truly virtuous gratitude, and a virtuous love between the sexes.
Okay.
This transformation happens when pure benevolence to being in general mixes its influence with the natural principle.
It mixes its influence. How does that practically change the nature of the affection?
Think of it as a governing force. When a principle of disinterested general benevolence enters the picture, it guides and regulates the operations of the natural instincts.
It takes the wheel.
Edwards specifically notes that this general benevolence softens and sweetens the mind. It makes the human mind more susceptible to the gentler natural instincts and directs them to their proper ends.
Softens and sweetens the mind. I love that phrasing. It implies that without this universal benevolence, our minds are naturally hard and bitter, entirely focused on defending our private territory.
And it acts as a preservative. Remember the trench of sensuality and the creeping decay of pride we discussed earlier.
The dry trench.
Genuine virtue prevents the increase of that pride and sensuality. It stops the natural affections from being drained away or turning inward into malice. It keeps the water flowing in the proper channels.
I want to synthesize what this looks like on a Tuesday afternoon. True virtue is not about destroying your love for your family, your friends, or your country.
Not at all.
Edwards is not asking you to become an emotionless robot who only cares about abstract universal concepts. It is about bringing those private, concentrated loves into alignment with a universal love.
It is about hierarchy and regulation.
Right. It means loving your family, but doing so in a way that does not demand injustice towards someone else's family.
Yes.
It means feeling gratitude for a kindness shown to you, not just because your ego is stroked, but because you possess a broader love for the goodness of the person who helped you, reflecting a love for the creator of that goodness.
That's the core of it.
It is about ensuring your private loves are governed by the right universal purpose, instead of allowing them to become isolated, selfish factions constantly at war with the rest of existence.
When the superior principle has a governing hand, a natural gratitude becomes a virtuous gratitude.
The engine changes.
Exactly. A natural parental instinct becomes a virtuous love. The instinct remains, but the engine driving it has been entirely replaced.
We have covered incredible ground today. We started by looking at how easily we mistake the reflection for the light itself.
It's a tough mirror to look into.
It is so easy to look at our pity, our gratitude, or our fierce loyalty to our tribe and feel completely secure in our own goodness. But Edwards challenges us to look at the boundaries of our love.
The boundaries are what define it.
He forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question. Are we loving the universal system with the Creator at its head? Or are we just fiercely, perhaps even ruthlessly, protecting our own private spheres and calling it righteousness?
It requires a level of self-examination that most people actively avoid. It is much easier to polish the smoke detector and pretend we have mastered fire.
Polish the smoke detector. Wow.
I will leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. We talked about how the Romans scaled up their private affection and used it to destroy the rest of mankind.
We did.
Take a moment and imagine if all your deepest loyalties, your loudest opinions, and your most celebrated personal virtues were suddenly scaled up and applied to the entire universe.
Okay, picturing that.
If everyone loved exactly the way you love, with the same boundaries and exclusions, would your current way of loving bring universal harmony, or would your private affections inevitably trigger a war against someone else's private system?
A truly staggering question to consider. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, thank you for listening to Reformed Thinking.